It's great to see you all here tonight for another Meet the Author presentation. Tonight's presenter, tonight's author, John Wukovitz, was born and raised in Akron, Ohio. He received his bachelor's degree from Notre Dame in 1967, and then he proceeded to go and get his master's degree from Michigan. Those of you that are college football fans know that that's a no-no to go from Notre Dame to the Go Blue. He researched World War II for over 20 years with a primary focus on the Pacific Theater. I think he's going to go into a little detail about how he got into this subject, so I won't spoil that for you. He's interviewed over 400 veterans in his works, and he's written for over 25 magazines, articles, and monographs and such. You've probably seen him on the History Channel with the Pacific, I think it was a 10-part series about the Pacific War, The Lost Evidence, and also on Oliver North's War Stories episode on Wake Island. He was a history teacher for nearly 40 years until he retired in 2005, and now he's able to continue his research and thankfully continue his writing on World War II. He's written 6 previous books, Eisenhower, which I think is above my head, which was part of the Great Generals series, 1 Square Mile of Hell, which was about the Battle of Tarawa, Pacific Alamo, which was about the Battle of Wake Island, Admiral Bull Halsey, as well as Evans Carlson, which was titled American Commando. Here, he's with us tonight to discuss his latest book, Black Sheep, the Life of Pappy Boyington. Welcome with me, John Wukovitz.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that fine introduction. I certainly appreciate being here because I've heard so much about the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and I think I pronounced it correctly, Narlands. You know, from Michigan, it's, or being the literature English pronunciation teacher back in Michigan, it's New Orleans, you know, kind of thing, but Narlands, I've enjoyed having the opportunity to speak at such a beautiful venue. Well, as Jeremy mentioned, I'll be talking about Pappy Boyington. I taught over 30 years history and literature in 8th grade back home, and you can see here a picture of me in my 2nd year of teaching in 1968, and you gotta love those glasses, the wide tie, sideburns. Does Revenge of the Nerds come to mind? I mean, I really was that. I was a little history nerd when I was in grade school because I loved reading history. I can remember getting a book on the Battle of the Coral Sea when I was in 4th or 5th grade. I think it was one of those landmark books that I grew up with, and I was hooked. And so I've been reading it ever since. Well, Jeremy mentioned the work that I did on television. The History Channel was Pacific, The Lost Evidence, is a 10-part series. Now, the next book that I'm pretty much done with, the editor is reading my manuscript this coming weekend, actually, he said, is about the destroyer escort, Samuel B. Roberts. It was a tiny ship that I'll mention a little bit later in the talk that fought at the Battle of Samar in October of 1944. Now, to get to Boyington, I'm going to start you off with 3 quotes that show a phenomenon of Boyington's life that sort of drew me to this book. When I talked to Hap Halloran was a bomber, member of the bomber crew, who spent time in prison camp with Boyington. And he told me that Pappy, he gave his eulogy at Arlington National Cemetery. And in that eulogy, he called Boyington the original Top Gun, a hero, a legend in his own time, an inspiration. When I interviewed Jim Hill, a Black Sheep aviator who still lives in Chicago, near Chicago, he said Pappy was the best damn commanding officer of a Marine fighter squadron during wartime. They loved him. All the black sheep loved him. Then I went to the AVG website. The AVG is American Volunteer Group. It was the Flying Tigers, more popularly known as the Flying Tigers. They hate his guts. And that's putting it mildly. Not one member of the AVG had anything good to say about Boyington. This man wrote in 2003 on the website what you see there. Boyington was no friend of the AVG. He was a drunk. He got mean. I had a lot of respect for everyone in our unit, but Boyington certainly was not one of them. And that got me thinking, what was it about Boyington that one group of men could detest him, and then within a year, a second group of men almost deify him? Every black sheep has nothing but praise. Every AVG, every Flying Tiger, nothing but condemnation. What was it about that guy? And that drew me to this book. And I learned in the research that that Gregory Boyington was a complex man with many layers, almost impenetrable layers of emotions and feelings and motivations. I mean, you'd peel one layer away, read about something or learn something about Boyington, only to find another thing hidden right beneath that. And to fully understand the man, you couldn't focus on just one layer. You had to take it all. It's like an onion. You just focus on one layer of an onion. You had to look at the entire onion. I mean, I have a couple examples up there, and maybe you've been reading them. He was the product of an abusive childhood who ignored his own children. He had a hit TV show and a hit book, always had trouble paying his bills. He hated taking orders, but became a valued squadron commander. Now, when I would tell people, they'd ask me, John, what are you working on now? And I'd say a book on Gregory Boyington. And like some of you here tonight said, because I tried to get around and meet everyone, I know I did not, and I apologize to those that I was unable to do so. But in talking to some, I had the same reaction. Oh, Boyington, you're doing something on Pappy. The Black Sheep Squadron, Baba Black Sheep, the TV series. And they were really fascinated. But also, other people would have a different reaction. And corresponding with another historian via email, he asked me what I was working on, and I said, Boyington, and he replied, why are you doing a book on him? He was nothing but a drunk. Well, I sent him an email response, and I said, well, yeah, he was, but I, too, am nothing but a drunk. I had my troubles with the bottle for 7 or 8, 9 years in the late 70s and early 80s. Haven't had a drink since 1983, but I had my troubles with it. Well, he sheepishly replied, sent another email, well, okay, maybe you'll have some insight into Gregory Boyington then. And he was right. I think it did help. The fact that I'm an alcoholic helped me understand him because, and I'll point out a couple in the talk tonight, as I was researching this guy, I remember thinking, God, I did that too. Or I said that, or I thought that. Not in the same ways that he did, but the same kind of reaction to how people treated him. So maybe it brought some insight into the book. It certainly helped me. Now, to say that his youth was a disaster, I guess would be an understatement. He was born in 1912, had a rough start. His father, a violent temper. His mother drank and smoked, was involved in entertainment, which was shocking for its day. Dad left when Boyington was 2, at which time Mom moved in with Ellsworth Hollenbeck, and that made matters worse. The podium is a little bit in the way, isn't it, of some of. Let me see. If that'll help a little, because I think it's okay over here. Is it for the cameraman? It's okay there? I'm not used to being recorded like this. I love it. But Ellsworth Hollenbeck verbally and sexually abused some of the children. There's no direct evidence he did so with Gregory, but you got to suspect something, I suppose, anyway. Christmas for many of us, I know it was for me, was a great time, still is a great time. Wonderful memories, not for the Boyington clan. I mean, I have pictures of Norman Rockwell type scenes, but Norman Rockwell never met the Boyingtons. Gregory wrote that the relatives would come over and sort of fake it being a family. And the more they drank, the more they argued. And so all Christmases were like my brother Bill and I ending up by going to a movie. You know, just going off on their own. Well, how did he escape this miserable childhood? He found that one arena in which he excelled, in which he felt safe, in which he felt competent. The air. And these quotes behind me show you that. You know, he said he always had a fascination with climbing things, trees at the edge of cliffs. He would climb a grain elevator. That's why I have a picture of that over there. His mom called him Deeds because he was always doing daredevil-type stunts. But he had this fascination of the air, which continued when he grew up a little bit more. He'd follow the World War I flying aces, the Red Baron, Eddie Rickenbacker were his heroes. He just couldn't get enough of that. And even his hometown of St. Mary's, he was born in Coeur d'Alene and then moved to St. Mary's. Clyde Pangborn was a daredevil pilot. He came to town one day, and Gregory was at recess, first grade, and the plane was coming into land, and old Gregory started scampering off, and the teacher said, "Gregory, come back, recess isn't over." And he replied, "I can't, teacher. A plane's going to land, and I got to be there." So Boyington, I guess, always had this trouble with authority, even as a little kid. And the next day, Clyde Pangborn took him up for a ride, and Boyington later wrote, "That's when it hit me. I was bound and determined to become an aviator." He had this connection with the cockpit of an airplane. A second example of that strong connection occurred in the early 1930s when Boyington was a student at the University of Washington. He was out for a Sunday drive, and just driving around, and he went out by the Boeing aircraft factory. And in front of the factory, they had a Marine fighter, the one that you see pictured there. And it was chained to the ground because it was an example of what they're making. So Boyington got out of his car and he stood and looked at that airplane for a bit. And then he wrote a revealing explanation. It seemed to me like the airplane, was a chained animal just striding to get loose of its chains and take off into its natural habitat in the sky. I had an emotional feeling run through my body that I wanted to unchain this little airplane and take it on up to wherever it would be happy. Now, Boyington was talking about an airplane, but he was really talking about himself. That airplane was chained to the ground. Boyington was chained to the ground with all the problems of his life, with the drinking that he had started. He was definitely, as that one guy said, nothing but a drunk. He certainly had his troubles with the bottle. Everything seemed to just pin him to the ground. But when he got into the cockpit of an airplane, it was different. As I mentioned, that's the one place he felt confident and secure. He knew what he was doing in the cockpit of an airplane. He was confident there. Everything outside the cockpit, he couldn't control. That's why I have a Christmas paperweight pictured here. Sort of, you shake it up and the snow scattered all over. That was Boyington's life outside of the cockpit of an airplane. In the cockpit, the snow settled down and was where it should be, and calm and safe. That's how Boyington felt. When I read this stuff about Boyington, I thought, holy cripe, I did that. I remember when I was just coming out of my drinking years, problems all over the place. On Sunday afternoon, quite often, I would go to the school and go to my classroom, walk in and close the door, sit at my desk and look out at the empty student desks and just sort of think to myself, I can control what's going on in here. I can't control outside the window or beyond the door, but in here, I know what I'm doing. Boyington had that one safe world, and that's what he held on to pull him through and some of the good times and get him through some of the bad. So it's key to understand Boyington, because when he got behind the controls of an airplane and soared to the sky, his problems eased and his shackles loosened, and he became, as Life magazine said in 1945, Boyington was born to be a swashbuckler. That was his arena. Well, he had two arenas, worked with two different groups of men, the AVG. He went over in April of 41. President Roosevelt set up a program where volunteers could resign from the military and go fly over in Burma and China. This was before the United States was involved in the war, so they had to resign their military commission and go over to fly. They were given great financial inducements to do so, and that's what attracted Boyington, the prospect of flying and money. By then he had married and was on his way to having 3 children. He had money troubles, and whenever an alcoholic has a lot of troubles, they're going to turn to the bottle quite frequently, and he did. So he figured, being with the Flying Tigers, I can make a lot of money. But it put him, so in August of 41, he resigned from the Marines to do that. But this put him in touch with a real professional group of men, the Flying Tigers, and a great leader, Claire Chennault, who's pictured here on the cover of Life magazine. These guys weren't going to put up with much. Time magazine compared them to Knute Rockne's Notre Dame football teams of the 1930s and 40s, and hopefully of 2011 and 2012 and 2013 and 2014. I don't know if you can see there's an ND on my shirt there. I love Notre Dame with a passion. But anyway, so they were real professionals, and they weren't going to put up with anything. They wouldn't put up with excuses. All that mattered was performance to these guys, and Boyington got off to a terrible start. On the trip over from San Francisco to Burma, he was pretty much drunk every day. One of the men said he's been well oiled since the trip began. That did not impress them all. He was one of the guys, a lot of them did a lot of drinking, but he took it beyond, let's say, huh? And so that wasn't impressive. Secondly, when he arrived in Burma, the men of the AVG who already were there, the Flying Tigers, wondered about this guy. Why did he resign his Marine commission? Because he's older than we are. This guy must be running away from problems. He was. Olga Greenlaw, who's pictured here, her husband was with the AVG and she was overseas with him. And she wrote a book. She was reputed to have had affairs with Boyington and with some of the other members of the squadron. So Gregory knew her quite well. But she said the boys placed 2 strikes against him before they ever saw him. Now, to an alcoholic, having 2 strikes against you before you even open up your mouth, it's hard to overcome that. You want people to respect you. You want them to accept you. You want them to look up to you, to ask for your advice, that kind of thing. See, Boyington never realized you don't get other people's respect until you have your own respect. You get self-respect. And he never did catch on to that fact. Fortunately, I did, and that's what helped me get out of it, my troubles. But he didn't. So here he arrives, and they have these 2 strikes placed against him. So he's knocked off balance. Then Boyington was expected to be named commander of the squadron by Chennault. He was not. Chennault gave it to someone else. So he butted heads with old Leatherface, was a nickname for Chennault. They didn't get along. Then he hopped into an airplane and started taking off down the runway, and it veered off the runway. And the other guys, the other pilots teased him. What's wrong, little shark? Get away from you. Now here, the men were not just attacking Boyington, they were attacking his safe, sheltered world of a cockpit, the one area he knew he was good. But they were teasing him. The more they teased him, the more he drank. The more he drank, the more they teased him, and so on, and so on, and so on. And he even admitted, I was forever going somewhere, but never getting anywhere. Well, it worsened when the squadron commander was shot down and killed, and in a crash, and Boyington expected to be named his replacement, and he wasn't, so he decided to resign April of 1942 which, as you can see, the AVG were not too unhappy. Big news of the day was Boyington's resigning. That made most everybody happy. They never accepted him. He never felt that he could contribute. And so he didn't make a good name with them. Well, he goes to the Black Sheep, January of 1943. So that's April of 42 to January of 43, 8 months. Major success. What's the difference? The Black Sheep accepted him. They looked up to him. That's the difference. In Boyington's mind, now you have to try and understand the warped mind of an alcoholic, and I can call it that, being one, it is. We go through these tortuous kinds of thoughts and justifications and whatnot, huh? And here Boyington saw, they like me. Remember Sally Fields, that Oscar? You really like me, you like me, that kind of thing. That was sort of Boyington. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. But that's sort of what Boyington was going through. He had built up a record with the Flying Tigers. He at least shot down some enemy aircraft, and they respected him for that. He claimed he shot down 6. The AVG said, you didn't. You shot down 3.5, and that's it. But everyone back home took the 6 as how many he shot down. So the Black Sheep respected him. They looked up to him. They wanted him to lead. Boyington also came to the South Pacific at a good time, a time when Nimitz and King, Admirals Nimitz and King, were much in need of aviators. They had lost a lot of the carrier air groups in the great carrier clashes, and so they turned to Marine squadrons to fill the job. And going up the Solomon Islands from Guadalcanal to Bougainville and on to Rabaul. And so he was at a place where he was needed. And that's important to an alcoholic as well. So he gathers the first group of Black Sheep pilots, and unlike what many people thought, sometimes based on the TV series, these guys were not a bunch of drunks and misfits. He did not empty the brigs of the South Pacific or anything. He got good, qualified pilots. And the teacher in Boyington came out right away. These guys want something from me. He gave it back. He gave it back. I was there to coach them, to tell them what the game was about, to protect their lives with my knowledge. If a boy, and there he is pictured right there, if the boy can't fly well enough, it's up to me to teach him. And every man I interviewed said, yeah, he imparted all kinds of wisdom to us. He was a wonderful instructor. The Marines agreed. After Boyington was shot down in January of 44, they compiled a pamphlet, a booklet, called The Combat Strategy and Tactics of Boyington. And they asked the Black Sheep, what did he teach you? What did he focus on? And they distilled it to 64 different points. And in this booklet, they credited Boyington with the man who was responsible more than any other for changing our strategy in the South Pacific. Now, I'm only going to focus on a couple points here that Boyington stressed to his Black Sheep. First of all, preparation. Preparation, you got to know what you're doing before you do it, kind of thing. And that's true, I guess, with any endeavor, I suppose. I know as a teacher, I had to be ultra prepared. As a writer, definitely you have to know what you're talking about, be prepared. He told his pilots, you know what? The time to worry about something is not when you're in the air and in combat. That's too late. You got to think about it in the period before combat. All missions must be preceded by thorough planning and briefing. If anybody stops and thinks up in the air in combat, you're dead. You got to react instinctively. Part of preparation was knowing your aircraft, the Corsair, and the enemy's aircraft. And so he focused on the advantages and disadvantages of the Mitsubishi fighter, which I've listed over there. He wanted his pilots to know, yeah, this is a pretty good plane, but here's its weaknesses too, and here's how you can exploit it. And he had them know their own aircraft, the great Chance Vought Corsair, which they all loved with a passion. One of the greatest fighters of World War II. He said, you know something, guys, we've got a pretty good plane. Boyington said the Corsair was a sweet flying baby if I ever flew one. No longer would we have to fight the Nips fight, for we could make our own rules. So he'd focus on the advantages. He was just trying to get them to realize, you know something, you guys are good pilots. We've got a good plane. Don't worry about the enemy. That was such a feared aircraft that the Japanese called it the whistling death. And the American aviators called it the bent wing widowmaker. Now, you know you're going into combat with something good when it earns those appellations, huh? Boyington was trying to demystify the Zero. You know, in the early part of the war, there was this thought that the Japanese fighter was a Superman kind of an image, a far superior soldier, and the same thing with the Zero. He said, that's not right. He said, yeah, that's good aircraft, but ours is equally as good, and you guys are equally as good fighters, pilots. The next thing he had him do was practice all the time. As often as he could, he'd arrange practice missions, and at night they would get together in bull sessions, and everybody was encouraged to talk, as that quote says. He wanted them to share ideas and learn from each other. And finally, he said, hey, you know what, you guys, what kind of a plane do you fly? A fighter. That's the purpose of the plane, fight. A fighter aircraft are designed and pilots are trained to fight. First, last, and always, we have to be aggressive. It's just like street fighting. You get the first blow in, maybe you knock them out right away and win. Now, in addition to all the points he tried to instill, Boyington with the black sheep, and this is totally opposite from the AVG, Boyington focused on making the men believe they were special to him. And I've found this so true in a lot of the commanders I've studied. Eisenhower was huge on that. That was a big part of the book I wrote on him. His desire to make the men feel they were important. Boyington did that too. He said he always said a prayer for his men before they left on a mission. That's unlike Boyington any other time. You know, he was not a religious man, although the only time he thought of the word God was when something else came right after it in 4 letters usually, huh? Yeah, so he wasn't too religious, but he'd always say a prayer for them. If they got a new Corsair or 2 in, he'd say, give it to the other guys, let me have one of the old clunkers, I'll take it. He always led in any attack. He didn't send any man into a mission that he was not willing to go on. They had pig roast, fish fries, song fest, no pointless rules. Boyington hated rules that were meaningless to him. So he was strict in air discipline, but on the ground, it was up to them. As long as you flew okay, that's all he cared about. And it worked. Lieutenant Fred Loesch, one of the black sheep, has that quote right there. It was a time of extreme stress, but in just those couple of months, I became closer to that group than my own brother. We had a team. We were the black sheep. Other squadrons were individuals. We were a team. I'll always treasure those few weeks with the black sheep. Totally different, totally different. Now, they had 2 combat tours going up Bougainville, as I said, and on to Rabaul, and Boyington put on quite a record. In one day in September, he shot down 5 aircraft, and these are all recorded and verified. In October, he shot down 3 in less than a minute, and he loved everything about it. You know, he had a group of men who responded to him. I'm working, he said, with the best bunch of guys in the South Pacific. I'm flying, I'm fighting, I'm killing Japs. I'm the happiest man in the world. They looked up to him. They accepted him, kind of a thing. And the Japanese certainly had the opposite. Commander Masatake Okamaya, one of their leading pilots, said that, you know, we Japanese had dominance in the South Pacific, and then Boyington and Black Sheep and other aviators came along, and the hunters had become the hunted. The Japanese, the hunters, are now being hunted. Tellingly, every AVG member said Boyington flew drunk. Every Black Sheep member said Boyington never flew drunk. Never. They admitted he got drunk on the ground, never in the air. Not one. Of all those that I interviewed and of the books that I read and accounts that I read, not one. The AVG swore, and then he did. He admitted, yeah, I flew drunk when I was with the AVG, but not here. Well, in January 1944, in a mission, he shot down his 26th aircraft to tie the record for Marine aviators in the Pacific. And in returning on that mission, he was shot down off Cape St. George, captured and spent 19 months in a prison camp. But in his 84 days of combat with the Black Sheep, you can see they shot down 97 planes, produced 8 different aces in only 87 days of combat. Now, after the war, Boyington came home from prison camp and experienced a rather spotty record, I guess is a kind way to put it. He resigned in August of 47 and couldn't hold on to any job. People and places would hire him because of who he was. Pappy Boyington, recipient of the Medal of Honor, big hero. They'd hire him, then they'd tire of his drinking and coming in late, and he'd lose those jobs. He had a messy string of affairs with different females, and he said, I can handle Japs okay, but I can't do much with women. I don't know what to do there. Tellingly, he also made that remark. He basically said, I was really happy when I was in prison camp. I didn't have to make any decisions. They told me what to do. He didn't have to even worry about anything. Time magazine agreed. They said, yeah, something to Pappy, peace had been something less than wonderful. But something else, to peace, he had been something less than wonderful. Well, he had a couple triumphs, obviously. In 1958 came his memoirs, Baba Black Sheep, which was a best-selling book. In 1976, NBC aired the TV series of the same name, starring I knew I was going to say James Conrad, the writer, Robert Conrad, the actor. Big hit with the public. I remember watching it, and a number of you mentioned it. The Black Sheep hated it, because it made them look like they were drunks and misfits, and they weren't. Fred Avey lived 2 miles from me. He said, television made it look like all we did was party, but that wasn't true. We never went up drunk. The only thing accurate about the show was that we flew Corsairs. Everything else was wrong. Frank Walton was a squadron intelligence officer. He wrote an article for TV Guide, and he called the series as phony as a $3 bill. And he said later, you know what? The real shame of that TV series is the harm it's done to the reputation of all the Black Sheep who have come back after the war and been a success in business or law or whatever. Now they have to put up with this. He said, and what of the men who didn't come back from the war? Their reputations are impugned. So Pappy did apologize to them in a reunion in Hawaii. He apologized for his part in that series. Well, in January in 1988, he succumbed to cancer and left a legacy that Ed Olander, another of the Black Sheep, pretty much hits on the head. I can say with conviction that when countries are facing a crisis such as war, inevitably some men step forward and lead when leadership is most needed. Greg Boyington was such a man. I'm grateful that I knew Greg Boyington at his best in combat. What was the difference? Acceptance. The AVG didn't accept him, and it wasn't their fault. I am in no way condemning or criticizing the AVG. That's how anyone would have reacted. They didn't accept him, and Boyington, the alcoholic, took that and became defensive, and drank. The Black Sheep accepted him, and that made all the difference. Now, the second part is, while we have a lot of veterans who disagree on Boyington, there are a few things that the veterans don't disagree on. The World War II veterans I've interviewed. This is nothing major that they have ever moaned to me about or cried or said it shouldn't be this way, but I've heard these concerns often enough that I know it's something out there. And this sort of fits in with November 11th, Veterans Day coming up. And that's why I've included this little part here. Do our actions have any meaning? Some of them have said to me. Have we accomplished anything special? Will we be forgotten? Now, obviously, all they have to do is come to a place like this, and they know that they're not forgotten. And they aren't forgotten. But men still express that, and have through the years. One guy from Wake Island, these are some of the veterans from Wake Island there, quoted the words to the Whiff and Poof song, "We're poor little sheep who've gone astray," blah, 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 something like that. One of the lines to it goes, "And we shall pass and be forgotten with the rest." And then he added to me, "All of us." So we're going to be forgotten. No one's going to care. Now, this was said when I was doing the Pacific Alamo book, and so that would be in 2002, 9 years ago. They say that even though they did some extraordinary things like Lieutenant Hanna or Colonel Hanna, the same man pictured in 2002, an amazing guy. No bigger than up to my shoulders, thin, wiry, but with a glint in his eyes that made you pause. I mean, he still had that fire. He told me in 2002, "John, if the Marines would take me back today, I'd rejoin in an instant." And he was 85, 86 at that time, you know. He would rejoin. He's wearing a Marine t-shirt there. His neighbors told me that he wears a different Marine t-shirt every day of his life. One of them that he wore when I was there said, "Old Marines don't die. They just go to hell and regroup." You know? I mean, he was an amazing man. Sadly, he's deceased now, but what an individual. Well, on Wake Island, the place was attacked the same day that Pearl Harbor was attacked. People back home were wondering, wow, the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, they're investing Guam, and Singapore is being hit in Hong Kong, and the Philippines, and they're going, where's our military? Where's our forces? Aren't we strong? What's going on out there? Well, the Marines on Wake Island is what's going on out there. For 2 weeks, they held out against overwhelming odds, and each day they did, they raised home front morale. The Marines on Wake, they're still there, they're still fighting. Lieutenant Hanna and the rest, there are about 400 of them, held on for the 2 weeks until December 23rd when an overwhelming force attacked, and Hanna organized a last-ditch stand around a gun, much like this 3-inch gun you see pictured here. And there were about 15 guys there with him. And he said, "John, the Japanese pretty much had us surrounded, and hand grenades were rolling in, and we were throwing them back, and bullets were pinging against the platform, and I was firing with my .45, and Japanese bodies were slumping down 10 yards from me." And Ralph Holowinski told me, he was with Hanna in this fight, he said, "You know, John, just for a split second during that fight, I flashed back to my childhood in Gaylord, Michigan, to these movies I used to love watching." He said, "You remember the ones where the settlers or the soldiers were seemingly hopelessly surrounded by the Indians, and then in at the last minute comes the U.S. cavalry to save the day." He said, "I looked out at all those Japanese and I wondered, where's the cavalry now?" Well, they didn't arrive, obviously, and Hanna and Holowinski and the others, and we have a family of a civilian construction worker who fought at Wake Island. There were about 1,100 or so taken captive. They fought with the Marines, and we have a family here tonight with us, and another gal doing a book on the civilian construction workers. Well, they spent the rest of the war in various prison camps. But in the process, as I say, boosted home front morale with slogans, "Wake up America, our flag is still here," political cartoons from the day. In this corner over here, you see a Marine on Wake Island writing a Christmas list to Santa. You know, it's December. And it says, "Dear Santa, send us some more Japs." Well, that came supposedly from when the Marine commander was asked by Pearl Harbor, radioed him and said, "What do you need more of in this fight against the Japanese?" Supposedly he said, "Send more Japs." And the people back home ate it up. They said, "Wow, that's the fighting spirit. That's what we want. That's what we love." Well, he never said it. It was propaganda. I mean, I asked every Marine I interviewed in that book, and they said, "You know, John, maybe I'll accept that we're pretty good fighters, But we weren't stupid. We didn't want more, we wanted fewer. You know how today we get a movie of the week, it seems, right after something happens? Hollywood started writing the script for the movie Wake Island, which earned 4 Academy Award nominations. They began writing the script before the battle was over. It starred William Bendix. A friend of mine attended a Navy and Marine convention not long ago, and he said, John, we were sitting there at a break and just chatting, having coffee, donuts, whatever. Suddenly, the senior officer in the room said, 10 Hut, Wake Island Marine on deck. In other words, a guy who fought at Wake Island just walked in the room. Everyone in the room stood, turned to the elderly gentleman, and saluted him. So that's how much the Marines respect the guys from Wake Island. Well, I asked Colonel Hanna, wow, you're a hero. You did something special. You did something meaningful. He said, nah, I don't feel like a hero. He actually started crying. I don't feel like a hero. And then he said something that almost every veteran I have talked to has said, I did what I was supposed to do. I was just doing what I was supposed to do. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, this quote of Colonel Hanna's, all right? People have fears of them being forgotten or their actions being meaningless, as illustrated by A.L. Arpin here, a letter he wrote to Admiral Clifton Sprague after a battle in which Mr. Arpin's son died. It's when the Japanese surprised an American force and the ship was sunk and his son died. And he wrote Admiral Sprague, maybe you won't like this letter, but just consider that it comes from a father and mother who, because of the loss of their only son, now have no further interest in life. It is one thing to lose a son in a fight where he has a chance and is doing something for his country, but it's an entirely different matter to know that he was caught in a trap and didn't have a chance and nothing to show for his having sacrificed himself. What meaning was there to his death? The Japanese surprised you, the ship was sunk, and I lost my son. What for? You guys made mistakes. When I was researching a book on Tarawa, I went to the Marine Corps Research Center at Quantico. Beautiful place. Some of you have been there. Wonderful repository of all kinds of neat stuff. For a historian, it's like when I was a kid, give me candy, and I want more candy. Put me in a candy store, nothing's safe. Put me at the Marine Corps Research Center as a researcher now, same feeling, man. I'm a kid in a candy store. It's, a lot of Marines will send stuff to them. It's like maybe the guys are doing that here, Jeremy, sending material that they don't need or want, or they want you to keep for them. And the Marine Corps Research Center has it, but it's not all on display. It's in boxes, and so you open up a box, you don't know what's in there. So I love going to that place. Well, I found this poem when I was researching Tarawa. Tarawa was a fight in November of 1943, a bitter, bloody 3-day battle. If you saw the opening to Saving Private Ryan, which most of you I'm sure have done, where they wade ashore, that was Tarawa for 3 days. And then once they got on the island, there were no backlines because it was such a small place. So it was brutal. A lot of guys killed. Well, this Tarawa veteran, his son is looking through an atlas trying to find Tarawa, and he can't. And so the poem goes, you say it's not on the map, my son? Oh God, it's engraved on my heart. That fringe of palm, our approach at dawn, a challenge to death, and the hellish spawn that tore loose our clay at Tarawa. You want me to tell you about it, my son? Oh, it's an epic of blood and tears. These sightless eyes and mangled feet proclaim our victory and the Japs' defeat on the charnel-like sands of Tarawa. Lifeblood, the price by which an atoll was won. Look again. It must be on the map, my son. All my buddies died, and you can't find it? Well, one of the most powerful statements to this effect occurred in researching the book that's coming out next year on that ship, Samuel B. Roberts. I was talking to a commander of one of the other vessels, and he did some heroic things. And I could hear kids in the background talking. I assumed they were his grandchildren. And I said, oh, when we were done interviewing, I said, hey, Commander, are those your grandchildren? Yeah. And I said, wow, what must they think of you, their grandfather, and everything you did? And he said, oh, my family doesn't care about what I did. My grandchildren don't even know the story. Nobody gives a damn about what we did 60 years ago. Now, he said it with such sadness and resignation. It bothered me. I said, is this true? I mean, I care. I'm talking to the guy about it. But he still feels people don't care. Is this true? Can it be? So I was still teaching at that time. I decided, okay, I'm going to test out this statement. And what better group to test out something than 8th grade students? You know, the kind of people who suppose you don't care about anything that happened before last week. You know, as a history teacher, I'd hear now and then, who cares about a bunch of old dead guys, Mr. Wukovitz? You know, that kind of thing. So I came in one day, and instead of the usual history lesson, I talked to them for about 45, 50 minutes about the Battle of Samar. Now, this is the Philippines, Leyte Gulf, where MacArthur was landing with his forces. The Japanese knew MacArthur was coming, so they had a three-pronged attack to come in and swoop in on Leyte Gulf from the north and the south, especially this line here that I keep taking off and putting back on. That was battleships and cruisers of Admiral Kurita, the most powerful striking force afloat in either ocean. They lured Admiral Halsey to the north. And that's why this Japanese force was able to swoop in from San Bernardino Strait and coming down onto Leyte Gulf. That's why Mr. Arpin was so mad that his son died. Halsey didn't do what he was supposed to do in that instance. Well, Kurita ran into Taffy 3. The Samuel B. Roberts was one ship of Taffy 3, and as the next screen shows the comparison, the Japanese grossly outgunned Taffy 3. Taffy 3 was a group of ships not meant to fight a surface engagement. They were not armed with anything at all, larger than what they called facetiously pop guns, just for show. They were meant to look for submarines and fly support for MacArthur's troops ashore. That's all. Any one of Kurita's battleships, any one of them could wipe out all 13 ships of Taffy 3 without problem. Admiral Clifton Sprague, the commander there, the guy who got that letter from Mr. Arpin, took a look at that, the Japanese battleships and cruisers barreling down on them, and said, you know, what chance could we have against them? Each containing enough destructive power to wipe us out and bearing down at us at twice our speed. So we can't run. They're going twice as fast as we are. I thought we'd have 5 minutes at best. Well, what he did was he gave the order to charge. That's all we can do. They're going to catch us anyway, so I'm going to take the escort. There were some little carriers he had. He moved them one way and sent the destroyers and destroyer escorts, real tiny ships, to charge Japanese battleships and cruisers. Now, sending a destroyer escort like the Samuel B. Roberts against a Japanese battleship is like a kid on a tricycle going out to Interstate 10, planting himself in the street, face a semi, and going, charge! And he's, pedaling his legs furiously against the semi. That's sort of what it was like. There's a picture of some of the ships during the battle. It was such a noble action that Herman Wouk, the great writer of Cain Mutiny and War and Remembrance, wrote, the vision of Sprague's destroyers and destroyer escorts charging out of the smoke and rain straight toward the main batteries of Japanese battleships can endure as a picture of the way Americans fight when they don't have superiority. Our school children should know about it, and our enemies should ponder it, for its theme is one that will stir human hearts long after all the swords are plowshares. Gallantry against high odds. Amazing action. I think one of the most heroic that Jim Hornfisher captured so well in Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. And my book on the Samuel B. Roberts will focus on just that ship, but it's the same action. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, the commander of the Samuel B. Roberts, when he received the order from Sprague to attack, he turned to his crew and went on the PA system and he said that, quote, "Men, we are about to go into a battle from which survival is not to be expected, during which time we'll do what damage we can." So he's basically saying, we're going to die, but we're going to charge. Well, charge they did, and they obviously were sunk, but in the process, they, along with the other ships of Taffy 3, turned back the Japanese in a miraculous action that I won't get fully into here. Well, as the ship was sinking, Copeland told one of his guys, "Hey, make sure you get our largest flag and put it up there, because that's what I want our men in the water to see. When the ship is sinking, I want them to see the flag." And that man, Orban Chambliss, an amazing veteran, said, "The last sight we saw of our ship was Old Glory proudly snapping in the wind, and as the flag disappeared beneath the water, we all took a last look. To this day, whenever I hear the national anthem or Pledge of Allegiance, I think of that moment in the water and start to cry." Now, they were in the water for 50 hours after fighting the Japanese, and you had the shark stories that would accompany that. The men, because of a mix-up in the coordinates, rescue craft didn't reach them until 50 hours later. And the sharks would come, and this one man said, "You know, I preferred the battle to the sharks because it was such a helpless, useless feeling when the sharks came." So they looped their arms inside the raft. And there were some men in the water outside, and the more seriously wounded were in the raft. The men outside looped their arms around the raft while the other guys held on, and they kicked at the sharks. And I sort of thought that was funny, not funny, but why? Until I read if some of you may know what the Blue Jackets manual is, it's sort of, they're giving it in training. Well, I got a copy of the 1943 Blue Jackets manual, and I went to the section on sharks. That's what it said to do. Kick at it. Its nose is very tender, and it may succeed. So they were just following what they were taught to do in training camp, huh? But anyway, guys were yelling, "Here comes another one." It worked a bit. One shark about 12 feet long came right by me, and I thought, this is it. I'll never see my family again. But it swam by and took the guy next to me. Another man was so badly wounded that his blood was attracting more sharks, and he said, "I'm dying. Cut me free. I'll float away, and the sharks will come after me and give you at least a little break in the water." I told my students about Charles Natter, an amazing youngster. He was a lifeguard at Atlantic City's beaches when he was in high school, so he was used to swimming to the help of people in trouble. Charles Natter, just out of high school, was at the raft, and he saw 10 or 12 of his shipmates holding on to planking, wooden plank. I'm trying to imitate floating in the water. That's what that is. I don't know if I got across, but anyway, that's what it is. They're floating on this plank and holding onto this plank, and Natter, this young kid, consciously swam 8-9 times out to that planking and brought these men back, and then a shark took him away, and he died. Now, as I am telling all of this stuff, and I told them much more than this, and much more of the gallantry and other actions of Paul Carr and a chaplain by the name of Henry Boserman. I got into all kinds of stuff that I don't have time for now. I could tell the students had this look. Now, a lot of times 8th grade students have a glazed over look. They're on Jupiter or Saturn or something like that, but they were really listening. It looked like there were some tears in some of their eyes. So right then I reminded them what this commander said. Okay, here's what this guy said. Nobody gives a damn about what they did 60 years ago. I said, that guy was there. So I said, all right, I want you to do something. Pretend you're writing this guy and answer that question. Do you care or don't you care? And I want you to be honest. Now, I know the 8th grade mind. It's a writing assignment. I want a good grade on this writing assignment. Wukovitz loves the military. Ergo, I'll give him what he wants. So I said, you don't have to worry. As long as you give me one sentence, you'll receive an A for this writing assignment. That's all. No worries, no hassles. Doesn't even have to be correctly written or correctly spelled, just a collection of words, you'll get an A. Well, I got over 100 responses, and I'll only share a few, obviously, and they just knocked me out. Sylvia here wrote, even though I do not know you, she's writing to the commander, it does not matter. When Mr. Wukovitz told me what you did, I almost cried. The way you all stuck together, sacrificing your lives to save someone else. Now, every time I look at the flag, I will think of your story. Don't care about the flag? Maybe they do, huh? Maybe they do. Angelo here, if I had a chance to talk to him, I would give him a pat on the back and tell him what a wonderful man he is. I never heard about this story, but I will pass it on to my mom today when I get home. Now, when's the last time an 8th grade student came home and did that? Usually it's, what did you do in school today? Nothing. But he says, I'm going to tell my mom about this. Mike here, as you were telling us this story, I was moved close to tears. The part of the flag made me realize how much we take the stars and stripes for granted. This story has given me the chills. I know I will never forget it. Jim personalized it. I'm thankful that people long ago died for me so I can go to school and have my dreams. I would like to go up to them and just say thank you because they died for me and only me. He personalized it. The best example of this personalization came from Ariel, who was quite a writer. She wrote, people of the past did make a difference. They gave up all their goals for me. They made it so I have a chance to accomplish my dreams. I want them to know that they didn't give up their lives for nothing. They gave me a great life, and I want them to know how much it means to me. Now, it's the next two sentences that got me. I must accomplish my dream to honor them. By accomplishing my dreams, I'm accomplishing their dreams too. I'm a writer, and I'm jealous of that 8th grade student. I mean, that's beautiful. An 8th grade, by accomplishing my dreams, I'm accomplishing their dreams too. Wow. A.L. Arpin's son did not die in vain. Veterans are not forgotten. If 8th graders, and I had one email me just the other day from that batch of students, if they still remember it, then these guys are not forgotten. Well, to end it with Veterans Day coming up, how can we make sure that veterans are never forgotten? Take a lesson from Colonel Hanna, who said, I was just doing what I was supposed to do. Let's do that. What if we all did what we were just supposed to do? He shrugged it off. I think it's remarkable. Use the world of education. What if every teacher taught the way he or she was supposed to? I taught for a long time, and I knew some great teachers. And I knew some bums who should never have been in the classroom. What if every teacher taught the way? What if every administrator administered the way he or she was supposed to? What if every student studied the way he or she was supposed to? And what if every parent parented the way he or she was supposed to? Wow, won't that make some kind of world? So doing what we were supposed to do is not something to shrug off like Colonel Hanna and the others do. It's quite remarkable. Look at, what if every politician did what he or she was supposed to? I come from the Detroit area where our mayor is, just got out of jail. Well, not just, but he's been in Texas for a while, but he got in all kinds of trouble. Eleanor Roosevelt visited a lot of troops throughout World War II, and she had a prayer that she said every day. It was in her purse, and the prayer went, Dear Lord, lest I continue my complacent way, help me to remember somewhere out there a man died for me today. As long as there be war, I then must ask and answer, am I worth dying for? Am I worth dying for? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Now, Eleanor Roosevelt's prayer and Ariel's statement are pretty much the same thing, aren't they? I mean, they really are. Just, I'm accomplishing my dreams kind of thing. And they share one of the main themes to the amazing movie, Saving Private Ryan. You know, at the end, near the end, when Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, is dying, and he is at the bridge, and he beckons Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, and he lifts himself up as much as he can, and he whispers in his ear, "Earn this. Earn it." In other words, we have just died to save you, Private Ryan. Go hope and earn this. Be a good man. Be a good person. Do what you're supposed to do. That's why one of my favorite scenes comes right after this, when they're back in the Normandy cemetery and the elderly Private Ryan is there and his wife is standing next to him, and they're at Captain Miller's grave. And he looks at her, and I almost felt the longing and emotion in his eyes. And he turns to his wife and he says, "Tell me I've been a good man." And she just goes, "Yeah." He was doing what he was supposed to do. Well, if we all do our duties, do what we're supposed to do, we will have happy lives. We'll make sure veterans are not forgotten, and we'll ensure the future for this little child at Arlington National Cemetery last Memorial Day. And I'll leave the final word to my good friends from childhood buddies and acquaintances. That's all, folks.